G'day everyone, Patrick Webb here, and today we're going to be looking at an extensive lens perspective test that I filmed recently using some Canon EOS mount lenses. I shot this test on the Red Epic X using the Mysterium X sensor. Also I used the native EF mount that comes with the Red cameras. I shot all the footage at 10:1 compression ratio at 24 frames a second, using not the full 5K sensor readout, but rather the HD 16:9 resolution, just to save editing time. There was no color correction applied to these images, so they're pretty much straight out of the camera. One thing to note before getting into this test, all the videos that were set or shot at f5.6 are at 800 ISO. All of the other videos are set to 400 ISO. Yeah, so I would say get into this test. First up, we are looking at the Carl Zeiss ZE EOS Canon mount lenses in various focal lengths. So let's get started with the 15mm f2.8 at 2.8. Now this lens exhibits fantastic distortion correction throughout the entire image. As we can see here right now, Johanna is shining the torch on here to exhibit some of the flare characteristics of this lens. Note that I'm using a bulb, not an LED torch, so it gives different characteristics as well. I'm going to have a look here at wide open. Some lovely bokeh balls in the out of focus areas in the background there. Overall, this image is pretty damn sharp, wide open. Let's have a look at those flares again. Now, this is a Carl Zeiss lens with some fantastic distortion correction and also lens flare correction. As you see there, the lens flare is pretty well controlled, and the overall loss of contrast is not overly drastic. There is a substantial amount of light bouncing around there, but that's what you'd expect from a wide-angle lens and shining it directly into it. Next up, we are having a look at stopping it down to f4. Notice how across the entire image, it's sharpened up a lot more. You notice a lot more contrast there. As you would expect by stopping down the aperture, the hole getting smaller. The flares are also a little bit smaller. The contrast is also very well maintained across the board. There's no real loss to resolution or detail. Yeah. Super wide angle lens doesn't exhibit super duper bokeh out of focus areas. That's obvious in this case. Again, with the flaring, this is going to be throughout the entire test, turning lights off, having a look at those flares once again with the lights on and off. Notice around the actual light itself, starting to get some of this diffraction with the light coming through the aperture blades. We're getting some kind of light streaks coming through there. This is normal in a lot of cases. In some lenses, you get some extreme flaring or light streaks or stars or whatever you want to call it. Bumping it up to 800 ISO here, as I mentioned in the beginning of the video. A little bit more noise in the shadows overall in the image at f5.6. Just wanting to have a look at that diffraction of that light coming through there. Notice how in the top right hand corner with the little Fresnel light, we're getting a little star characteristic there. Also the star characteristic coming on there with some streaks of that light as that light passes through and flaring. Out of focus areas, yeah, it looks pretty much the same as it did in f2.8, but that's typical of a ultra wide angle lens like this. Notice again with the lights off that flaring is pretty well controlled. Yeah, and those streaks coming through again as that light passes through and gives us that diffraction, giving a little bit of a star look. Overall, the colors are pretty well maintained, even when shining a light directly into the camera source. Yeah, with the next lens, we're looking at the 21mm f2.8, and you notice how the background has dramatically changed. I don't have any lenses in between that focal length, but you notice that jump and that perspective change there. The image is looking a little bit more flatter. With this lens, again, Carl Zeiss Distagon, very well controlled with distortion and everything, resolution, micro contrast, etc., is fantastic. The image looks very pleasing, even when shining a torch directly into it. There's no real loss of contrast whatsoever. Notice now the out of focus areas look a little bit more, let's say, dreamy, with those round bokeh balls from the fairy lights in the background there. Let's have a look at that flare once again. Yeah, notice how that diffraction is sort of curving there, giving us these curvy light streaks from the torch. That's interesting, but that's kind of typical when wide open like this. And we're getting some sort of rainbow streaking effects in the larger blooming areas there. Notice how this is stopped down to f4. Notice how in the Fresnel in the background there, you've got this funny little, looks like a little bit of a flower petal bloom of light going on there. That's an interesting effect also, probably for this focal length. And we're sort of seeing the same kind of characteristics in the light there. Light streaks, a lot more diffraction. It can be pleasing. For some creators, it can be a little bit off-putting. It's up to you what you like the look of, really, at the end of the day. Looking at those bokeh balls, they're starting to get some straight lines in them, but overall pretty round and pleasing. And that's at f4. F4. Let's have a look at that lens flare characteristics again. Okay, look at those streaks coming through. I kind of like it. It's got a little sun feeling to it. It's kind of nice. That light in the background again, in the Fresnel, in the top right-hand corner, it looks like a little flower. Yeah, it's a taste thing. So, back up to 800 ISO here. Looking at the overall sharpness, the image is pretty well controlled there. Looks tack sharp, as you would expect. That flaring petal in the Fresnel in the background there has gotten smaller. A little bit more sun star effect coming through. Notice how the diffraction or streaks of light seem to be getting a little bit bigger. Again, overall contrast or loss of contrast from shining the light in there is not so drastic. Out of focus areas, yes, bokeh balls get smaller, get a little bit more edges, to be expected when you're stopping down the lens like this. Let's turn the lights off and have a look at the shiny effect. Notice how that these streaks seem to get a little bit more dramatic or longer. Yeah, I kind of like it. I think it's a really nice effect. It's got a nice little bloom effect. Yeah, it's pleasing to me, but that's up to the individual. Let's have a look at the lens flare retake. I asked Johanna to do a little bit of an S to have a look at those bubbles or those flares that come at the bottom or on the opposite side of where the light's coming from. This is an interesting thing to observe because sometimes these flares can be a little bit distracting when they have some strange characteristics, as we'll see in other tests coming up. Okay, now notice how the Fresnel in the background has completely disappeared, but the background has gotten a lot more, let's say, compressed. So we're sitting at 28mm right now. This is a lovely lens. We'll get straight into the flare characteristics. Notice how around her head we've got this little floating disc thing. This is something to be aware of because this can actually be a bit of a distracting thing, especially if you're pointing the light like that. directly at the camera. Now bokeh balls, super round, looking a little bit like lemons, but overall pleasing. But you notice how dramatically different the out of focus areas are here. So that was before, that was at f2, now we're at f2.8. Sharpness is very well controlled, micro contrast, etc., etc. And this is also a beautiful focal length to work with generally. Also note, one thing I forgot to mention before, that this is not a full frame camera, as one might be referring to the photography world, but this is a Super 35mm sensor. So one has to take into account that the focal length or perspective is a little bit different here. I can explain that a little bit further in depth. Having a look at those bokeh balls, they're starting to getting those edges there. And then we'll have a look at those flare tests with the lights out. Just to continue on about this Super 35mm sensor thing, because this Super 35mm on the Red Epic, you have to take into account that your focal length won't be a true 28mm, but you have the 28mm characteristics. You just have to do the maths and times that focal length by 1.3, and there you get your difference. Your true focal length. So stepping the lens down at f4, a lot of contrast, a lot of color rendition, looking great. Let's have a look at those flares again. You see the little sunburst going on here, this little bobble jelly explosion of light coming through the image. Overall contrast is held very well. Those little annoying discs that come over in the flares are prevalent. Bokeh balls, yes, we have some little dectagons, octagons, whatever you want to call them, happening in the background there, but it's not too distracting. Let's switch the lights off and have a look at that flare characteristic again. Ooh. Yeah, notice how those discs, they're very distracting. So I would really try and avoid any crossover of the face or any like holding at long periods of time with this flare over face. But the actual general flare characteristics look beautiful on this lens. So stepping down to f5.6 on this lens, 800 again. Yes, sharp, sharp. Contrast is great. Notice that the diffraction of light there is giving these beautiful sun star feel. I quite like the characteristics of the light coming through on this lens, minus the weird little disc flares, which are characteristic of the actual torch itself. And then we can have a look at that sun star again. Oh, it looks fantastic. I really like this this little torch characteristic here. It's a nice look. You get a little bloom off there from the opposite side of where that light's shining in, but it's pleasing for some and not for others. Now let's get over to the 35mm f2 at f2. Again, even wide open at f2, this is pretty sharp. I don't really see any like overall softness. Maybe there's a little bit of vignetting on the edge-to-edge performance there. The background out of focus areas look pretty pleasing to me. Nothing out of the normal. However, when we go to the extreme close focus, we're getting some lemons in the background. Depends if you like lemons or not. For me, it's not a distraction. For others, it could be a deal breaker. Up to you as the filmmaker. So now we are getting some interesting lemon floating disc effect here. This is something that everyone has to kind of pay attention to, because this can be a bit distracting. Notice how that floating lemon in the picture there is just not a very good characteristic at all. Again, subject to opinion, but in my professional opinion, this is something that I would really avoid shining a light directly and having that flare go over a face. If it's right on the edge, whatever, but if it's coming into image like that, I feel it's not acceptable, and I would avoid that as much as possible. Let's continue on, stepping it down to f2.8 here. We are looking at general sharpness. We're starting to see the edges come up on the bokeh balls due to the aperture blade characteristic there. Overall performance is sharp, 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 as one would expect from Carl Zeiss. Even at f2.8, looks fantastic. Characteristics, again, a little bit more contrast here at f2.8 compared to f2. But yeah, you have to be really focusing hard on how the image looks. Little sunburst there. Yeah, again, this is a perfect example of floating objects, UFOs, I guess one could say, in your image. That, I don't know, again, everybody just needs to be aware of these little anomalies that happen in the images there. Turn the lights off. Yes, floating disc. The lemon is attacking our picture. So I would say, like, if you're going to compose this image with a light like this, then I would shine it from the corner. I'd have that disc go right from corner like this, for example. That looks great. But as we go here, directly shining in there, nah. That's a deal breaker for me. I would not recommend that at all. Stopping at f4, wow, let's have a look at that contrast. Let's have a look at their general exposure there. Of course, stopping it down another stop changes the overall light getting in there. Bokeh balls, yes, f4 bokeh balls, whatever. General sharpness edge to edge is sharp and looks great, my opinion. Looking at that background compression there, it's a lot flatter than the 15mm, of course. Also, we have to pay sometimes attention to like color shifts. That's why I have the little color checker in there. I haven't really noticed so much in terms of color shifting per se. I think with the Carl Zeiss lenses, overall the colors stay relatively well controlled and the same throughout the lens series. And this is partly why I did this lens test here, just to see the major or minor differences that one can pick out here. Some things that I might miss and others might pick up there. That's perfect. That's why we do this test, so we can make these observations and notes as we go along here. All right, 5.6. That background is sharpened right up. The bokeh balls are like little sharp plates. I guess you can call them that. Okay, up in the top left-hand corner there, that is just the light moved closer to my subject there. So that light is just out of frame, so I can get enough light on Johanna there and the subject without it being too underexposed. Again, look at the diffraction of light coming through there. We've got that floating disc. Yeah, it's not so noticeable as we go there. I mean, if it's a quick pan across the screen, it's okay, but if you're going to be holding that light into the picture, avoid it. Avoid it like the plague. Let's turn the lights off. Here we go. On this lens, the sun star is pretty like hectic. It's not... It's pleasing enough. We get a little bloom, as you see there. That's normal. All right. Jumping from 35 to 50mm. That background compression has completely changed, and also the overall exposure of this image is massive because we're open at 1.4. Notice how the plant and the color checker and the background are all really soft on the edges. I did my best to try and nail Johanna's eyes as sharp as possible. We're getting a real open flare characteristic there. The bokeh in the background. We have some lemoning going on, but it had a big focus throw here. So it took some time to get out of focus, but look at that out of focus area. Super soft. I like the characteristics of this lens. It's a nice lens. f1.4 is wide open, and you're getting that kind of characteristic when you have a open f-stop. Let's have a look at the flares. We're getting some rainbow, streaky, curvy flares going on here. Super lemon floating around the screen. The UFO is back and invading our picture again. Be aware of that, ladies and gentlemen. This thing, radioactive. Maybe not, but it's something to be aware of. All right, let's stop the lens down to f1.8. I went through the aperture range here just to have a look at the overall sharpness and control of flares and all this kind of stuff. Big difference between 1.4 and 1.8, even though it's one click. Notice how the edges have sharpened up considerably. Johanna's a lot sharper. The actual flare characteristics here are not so, as you would say, bowed, bendy, but a little bit more star sunstreak going on here. The big lemon is still haunting our image. Let's have a look at the bokeh balls. Not too bad, but a little bit edgy. Could be a deal breaker for some who are really finicky about their bokeh balls. For me, whatever. Doesn't matter so much. It's not the thing that I'm focusing on, really, at my overall image. General contrast, as you see when the light comes in through the barrel, we get a loss of contrast in the shadows, but that's to be expected wide open and shining a torch directly in. And notice on the top left-hand corner there, I've got a string from my softbox which is invading there. Don't worry, it's not my sensor that's got mud on it or anything. It's just the light's pretty close. All right, looking at that flare characteristic, we have that lemon floating around there. Just be aware, ladies and gentlemen, that this thing is annoying once you focus on it. And you have a look at this in other people's work as well. Sometimes you get a little bit critical. But again, when you focus on looking at pictures all day and use that as your profession, it can be a little bit frustrating when it's something of a pet peeve of yourself. Let's down. Look at that. There is a lot of detail coming into the picture there. Looking at the overall star characteristics of this torch coming through, you're starting to see some of those streaks coming in, but nothing too extreme in this case. The lemon, the notorious lemon. 2.8. Look at that. What a beautiful picture. f2.8, what one can expect is decent sharpness with decent shallow depth of field. As you can see here, the background is nice and not so distracting. We have improved edge sharpness, not only on Johanna herself, but also the checkerboard on the right-hand side and the plant on the left-hand side. Having a look at those bokeh balls, we're starting to get some of these octagon, dectagon, whatever you want to call it, characteristics and bokeh balls. Let's turn the lights out and have a look at those flares once again. Oh yes, that lemon is a lot smaller now compared to our wide open apertures before. Lot better control in the flare, I would say. We're getting some blooming areas, not so extreme streaks from the light itself, but overall contrast of the image is pretty well controlled. Here, the image is slightly underexposed. My bad. Yes, we're all human. We all make mistakes. But Johanna is exposed here, and we're having a look at the flare characteristics. Again, diffraction of light coming through. Some messy star action going on here. The lemon has got a little hole in it, as we're starting to see a little bit of the inner characteristic of the torch itself. Bokeh balls. Yep, we got some little bokeh balls. Nothing too extravagant. Overall sharpness is tack sharp. Turn the lights off. And look at those streaks again. We'll go from top to bottom. Notice that little flare following the light around in its opposite array. The reflection as it passes through the lens there. Overall contrast is very well maintained. Can't complain about anything here. Yeah, slightly underexposed again. Sorry about that. We have some more streaky action going on here from the light. It's kind of beautiful. It's kind of nice on certain angles. Let's have a look if she shines it up. Yeah, I mean, it's can be distracting, but it can also be a nice effect if somebody is going for that particular effect on purpose. Bokeh balls, nothing going on here. And focus back again. Sharpness is crazy sharp. I would expect it at f5.6 in a dark room. Looking at those colours, the red and the blue, looks pretty good. Let's have a look at this little floating lemon disc thing. Pretty well controlled, actually, compared to it being wide open. So, yeah, I wouldn't be too finicky about this in day-to-day use, but if you're doing some like image critical work, I would just keep an eye out on this. One of my favourite lenses ever in the entire universe is the 85mm. Look at that background compress itself. Look at how those goalposts have just opened up, framing Johanna with some fairy lights here. This lens flare characteristic of this wide open light diffraction, we're getting some aberrations here around the light itself, this purple fringing, a detail that some people see. The giant lemon is in town. Be aware of this one. Not a good one. Even though it's my favourite focal length, be careful of the lemon. Alright, bokeh balls. Notice how we're getting in the bottom of the screen there some reflections of the bokeh balls. I believe that's that could be something that one could also keep an eye out for as well. Generally not a problem, but on extreme close focusing can be an issue. Okay, we're getting some interesting like explosive ball action here. So the lemon, boom, is just floating around like crazy. I quite like the really large flares that come out from this. It's pleasing to me. Stopping down f1.8, super sharp. f1.4 was actually pretty sharp as well, to be honest. A lot sharper than the 50mm from observation. But here, let's have a look at the f1.8. Johanna's tack sharp. The characteristics of the flare has changed slightly. We're not getting this kind of explosive look, but we have a lot more of this aberration, this purple fringing around the light, and the overall bloom flare has disappeared a little bit. The background has also sharpened up a little bit. Bokeh balls, having a look at those little reflections in those dots in the bottom part of the screen. Interesting effect. Well, not really. I would say it's distracting from my opinion. Lights out. Let's have a look at those flares again. Actually, those streaks that are coming from the actual torch itself, they don't look too bad. Very small, very subtle. Yeah. Still got a bit of this aberration going on there, but that's what one would expect with a wide open lens, and you're not paying thousands and thousands of dollars worth of cash for a lens to be able to control that. But overall, fantastic lens, fantastic sharpness, super compressed background. I love it. It gives a very, I guess, a true to the person picture. The portrait of Johanna is kind of how you would expect to see Johanna in reality. Yeah, maybe. I guess that's up to another person to decide. Another professional probably might debate that with me, but in terms of like proportions and not making the head seem so pin-like, it's creating an overall compressed flat image there, which for me is more appealing when doing portraits of people in video work or photography. Again, the giant lemon floating around the screen, haunting our subject. It's not cool, man. I would avoid that like the plague. That's a big lemon. Not the lens, but the flare. So yeah. We notice generally, if we step down f2.8, this is around the range that I would be working in normally. It's nice working at wide open apertures. You get nice effects and flares and diffractions and all this kind of stuff that's nice and unique to wide open apertures. But if you're doing professional work, f2.8, just to keep the face at least sharp. Even f4 in video work, so you're not going in and out of focus. That can be a bit of a trap for some people who are like, oh, well, I want to get a cinematic image. I might as well just open up the aperture. So you can get these little lovely bokeh balls in the background. Not all bokeh balls are pretty, as you can see here in this test. Giving those little dots out in the background there. Sorry, the bottom of the image. Lights out. Let's have a look at that flare from the light. Yes. The lemon. The lemon is killing it for me. Even though I love this lens, let's stay away from the lemon. Let's stay away from lens flares directly in the camera and try and do it from one of the corners of the image. Shine it through. Maybe shine it quickly over the image, but not for a long period of time directly into the camera. Here we go, slightly underexposed, sorry about that, but if we have a look at the general sharpness and the contrast, f4 is like, for me, a sweet spot of keeping things super sharp, keeping things in control, contrast and all this kind of stuff in place. And say, for example, if your subject is talking, blah, 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 and they move back and forward slightly, there is that thing to look out for there. Bokeh balls are, yeah, nothing too particularly fantastic there. But if you're doing critical work, I would generally recommend that someone sticks around f4 when doing a talking head. But I mean, if you're a skilled person and you're able to keep your subject still and in one spot, then therefore experiment with f1.4. Nah, don't do that. f2.8 is a sweet spot for bokeh and sharpness and making the image look very, very artistic, but very professional. f5.6, yes, as you can see, tack sharp, super sharp. Again, slightly underexposed because, yeah, that's how I did it. Look at those lovely light flares here. That lemon is very much smaller this time. We're getting some edgy honeycomb effect on the flare there, sort of getting blocked out a little bit there. Pretty well controlled. Bokeh is what you would expect it. Bokeh is bokeh. Yes. Not to everyone. Let's turn the lights out and have a look at that torch flare. Took me a little bit longer to walk over to the light and turn it off because at 85mm and also trying to maintain this perspective or the same framing of the image, yeah, is a few meters back. Again, characteristics of that flare and also the turn of light coming in the lens is so. So let's move over to the Voigtländer EOS mount lenses. I've got two lenses here that I wanted to test. So back to wide. So this is a 20mm f3.5 color scoper. Love this lens, a little pancake lens. The camera has stopped it down to 3.7. Yeah, so it's not, I guess, wide open, but it's wide open enough. Look at this little red disc ghost floating around. Yeah, again, avoid directly into the lens, but from side to side it looks, it's okay. But it's a good test for the characteristic of the flare there. Overall sharpness is great, as you would kind of expect on a wide-angle lens. Or, I guess one would not expect that, but for this lens in particular, it's pretty sharp, and everything looks pretty good. My opinion only. Your opinion is different, of course. And everyone's entitled to their... This disc is ugly, though. I would avoid shining the light directly into it. Here, it's not too bad. Look at that. We'll get some nice blooming, but again, that little floating disc does come into the picture. And it gets also a lot worse when you're working with LEDs, because you see the individual LEDs as a kind of grid pattern come into this like floating disc flare as light enters the lens. Stopping down to 5.6. Yeah, because I decided that 3.7 was close to 4, and 5.6 was just my natural selection in this test. So overall, super sharp. One would expect ultra-wide angle lens. Getting the disc again, yeah, that's to be expected. We're getting some interesting effects in the star in the background there, and from the Fresnel. I kind of like it. It's got like a little leak of a leaf or something going on there, but yeah, interesting characteristic. I do like the star coming out of it. It's unique. It's unique. Let's have a look at those streaks again. Yeah, I know. I think the streaks are pretty cool. We get a little bloom there from the top. It can be nice, be a good effect. Up to you, or what your purposes are in this regard. Yeah, that's the characteristics of this little Voigtländer pancake lens. Such a tiny little lens, great for gimbal work, great for run and gun work. Pretty sharp. I like it. Works well. One of my favorite lenses in the entire world, ladies and gentlemen, the 40mm. And it's also a pancake lens from Voigtländer at f2. This is the Ultron. Look at that flare. This is a characteristic that is unique to this lens. I haven't seen this on any other lenses that I've used, actually. I kind of like it. It's unique. It will work for some jobs, not all. If you want a unique flare like this, go for it. This lens is not so easy to find, but if you do find one in good condition, get it. It's a pancake lens. It's tiny. It can go with you everywhere. I love it. Those bokeh balls, it's debatable. Look at the pattern inside the bokeh. It's a kill for some. For me, I don't mind. It's a little bit of texture. That being said, though, it can be a deal breaker in some cases, and it can't really be easily fixed, unfortunately. Looking at that flare again, well, super sci-fi flare. If you're going for this kind of, I don't know, effect, it's cool. I like it. It's very spherical. Yeah, it's a unique feature to this lens that none of the other lenses have. None of my Zeiss lenses have this feature. Not even the 50 at 1.4 or f2 even. None of them. So yeah, that's the bonus you get with this lens. Stop it down. Sharp. Super sharp. That background is nice and compressed. I like the 40mm focal length. 50mm and 35mm have been my lenses for a long time. 35mm I've been using a lot, particularly over the last, most of my photography career. I got a 35mm 1.4 from Canon and used that forever. But then when I started doing film work, when I got this 40mm, there's something that drew me to it. I don't know what it is. Maybe it was just like the compact size and the overall quality of the image that I get from it. Again, the bokeh balls are a little bit like, not so clean. You can do better on more expensive lenses, but hey, when you're spending like 250 euros-ish, $300 Australian, then you can't really complain for such a small, good quality lens. Again, manual focus lens. Just like all of the lenses in this test, apart from the last one. We'll get to that. Let's have a look at the streaking. There you get a relatively pleasing bloom. Not much star action going on here, but this is still pretty wide open. Contrast is pretty well maintained. The shadows lift a little bit when that light comes in, but it's not too... Again, top left-hand corner, light is close to the subject. There's no light leaking camera, so don't get any ideas. Yes, f4, sharp. What can one say? This image is very well controlled. The color looks pretty good. I'm not looking so much at the flare characteristics here, but I don't see so much aberration going on there. There's not too much purple fringing, so it's pretty well controlled. There's a little bit of red fringing going on there. Again, this shell pattern. Again, unique character lens. Could be good. Could be deal breaker. Up to you as the creative. Lights out. Look at those colours. Nice and rich in the background there. The little Voigtländer lens does the job. In my opinion, if you're to get a lens that's very well affordable and will give you kind of effect, and also really nice, well compressed background and overall sharpness when stopping it down past f2.8, yeah, you can't beat this lens. This lens is like a photographer and filmmaker's best choice. Also, if you're doing some nice portrait shots with gimbal work and you're not doing too much movement because it's a manual focus lens, not that you would ever really trust automatic focus. I mean, with filmmaking, it's subjective if one uses automatic or manual. I like to choose manual with my hands, or the follow focus, or a focus puller if I have the luxury. Focus, close focus, now getting closer to the subject. Is she sharp? Yes, she is. Overall image, super sharp, as we would expect at 5.6. Those little starry effects happening there from the light diffraction. Light being pushed through a smaller aperture. Yes, the flare is really well controlled. Where a little disc thing, it's gone. So it looks great. So if you're doing flare work, this might be a good lens choice for you. Definitely for me, but up to you. Let's have a look at a really old lens, the Zenit from the Soviet era. I picked this one up for cheap here in Norway. This is an f2, the Zenit Helios 44-2. This, I believe, is from the 60s, late 60s, maybe even the 70s. Based on the Zeiss Biota lens set up. So it is probably at heart a Zeiss lens. Again, a dreamy lens. Have a look at this rainbowy effect going on in the bokeh. And super soft at f2. We're getting these like kind of strange pancake lemons going on in the background there. Pleasing if that's something you're into. For me, it's not too bad. I like it. Even though it's f2, and this lens is notoriously unsharp, wide open, it's still pretty sharp in the center. As you can see, there's a bit of detail retained in Johanna's face. Flare characteristics, look at that. I kind of like it. Again, it's a giant kind of jellyfish with the sun shining through a jellyfish going on here. We get a bit of a rainbow effect going on. Pleasing, unpleasing, up to you to decide. As this lens doesn't have any predetermined clicking stops, this is approximately f2.8. Sharpness is sharp in the center, but you notice, look at that softness going on with the plant there, and the edge-to-edge sharpness is not there. Again, subject to creativity. This lens has its charms. This lens sits in between my 85mm and my 50mm because it's kind of like almost a 60mm f5. 58mm, 60mm, pretty close. So it kind of fills in the void a little bit there. not entirely, but it does the job. You notice how it's still not so different from the 50mm. A little bit more belly than the 40mm, of course. Duh. What am I talking about here? I really like the diffraction on this lens. That starburst from the torch is very... I don't know. There's something very about it. Oh, I used the organic word. Organic in photography. There we go. Light is organic on a digital sensor. How about that? I guess some people are really looking for that organic look, that real kind of look, rather than that overly digital look in some respects. Hence why I used a non-LED torch in this case. So we get a little bit more of an organic look. There we go, ladies and gentlemen. You can pay me extra for that one. I bring you organic images. Here we go. Looking at the out of focus areas there. Yep. They're blocks. They can connect together. Nothing so fantastic there about them, but they're okay. Looking at the color characteristics, the colors are pretty well controlled. The greens are probably a little bit deeper for some reason, from my observation. The starbursts, yeah, looks alright. Organic. There you go. This lens for me is a leaf tool. I take this picture when I'm doing some like portraits of children, or of like ladies, with a bit of a sun backlit situation. We get this nice, beautiful glow coming in through the lens. The contrast is dropped down because it's not very well controlled in the lens, and you get a dreamy look overall. It's got its effect. It's got its place in my toolkit. It comes out occasionally. It's a fun lens to work with. Super cheap. You can pick it up anywhere for like, I don't know, 60, 70 bucks. I paid 600 kroner, 700 kroner here in Norway, which is around 60 euro, 70 bucks Australian-ish. Pick up an adapter for like 5 bucks, 10 bucks, whatever. Make sure it's an aligned adapter. Pay a little bit more for your adapter. That's my hint. Don't get like a $2 adapter. Pay like 5, 10 bucks, and you get a good quality adapter. One that you could probably adjust if you need to. Yeah, just from my experience, sometimes with adapters it can be very dicky indeed. Let's move over to an interesting lens, the Tokina 11-16. This is for C sensors. So notice how here we are at 11mm, and on the edges here we're getting some vignetting. This is too wide for the sensor. This is extreme. Notice how the 11mm, these goalposts are literally, I don't know, what would you say, kind of stringing Johanna's head. They are holding her head up here from her shoulders. She's got a little shoulder pack mount here. Super wide, super up close and personal. Out of focus is, yeah, well, that's as far as the focus throw goes. You can see the entire room here. Flare characteristics are okay. We're getting haunted by this green disc with a nuclear spill. Yeah, up to the individual whether they like the dummy in the picture or not. I personally don't like it too. I find it a little bit overly distracting. Stop it down a little bit. Look at that star from the Fresnel in the back right-hand corner there. Looks nice. Personally, looks nice. Colors are pretty well maintained. Actually, the streaks we're getting here, we're getting a little bit of this like barrel light distortion, but as you would expect on an ultra ridiculously well lens, that's what happens. Out of focus control, out of focus, focus. Let's have a look at those flares again. Yes, whoop-de-doo. It can be fun for someone if you like having asteroid coming through the atmosphere flare look. Get this lens. It'll do it for you. You can see all the bits of glass inside the lens. Sitting at 11mm, still 5.6. Getting some more light streaks as the light is squeezing through a smaller hole. More diffraction. It can be fun. Stars are fun. Notice how that tree is really reaching for Johanna right now. And that checkerboard with all the colours on it on the right-hand side seems to be always haunting that side of the image. Looks to be bigger. Or does it? I don't know. I did my best to try and maintain the composition here and have Johanna as centered as possible on the screen. There we get to see a bit more of those characteristics of all the pieces of glass inside this lens. This lens isn't too bad, actually. I've had it for quite a long time now. I used it a lot for gimbal work. Zoom it out a little bit, 13mm. Notice how that background is getting a little less inside. Some flare characteristics again. It's pretty same as the 11mm, as one would expect. Get some more dummy effect going on here. Bloop. Yeah, I don't know. I've used this lens on various occasions, particularly with gimbal work, because I was able to zoom it in and out, and it's a fairly light lens. Plastic body, glass inside. A spherical lens, apparently. This is the 80X Pro f2.8, so it's the Pro version. Again, for smaller sensor sizes for the APS-C. You can use it on this camera, obviously, but you would have to crop the sensor in a little bit to not get that extreme wide-angle vignette going on, or the barrel. You see the barrel, full-frame sensor camera. Again, if you're using it on a Scarlett, and it's cropping into 4K anyway, then you can use it on the Scarlett without any issues. Great lens for that if you're run and gun mission with just a wide angle lens. Again, it's up to you what tool you use and how you use it, but here is just a classic good display of how the lenses handle flares and all the perspective changes in the actual image itself of when your subject is placed in the middle. Yeah, I think I've gone through like the general focal lengths of what everybody would probably want to experiment with. There are, of course, the longer lenses, so anywhere from 85 upwards. So I didn't have the 100mm Zeiss lens in my collection, and 85mm is actually my longest lens. I would probably look at having the 100mm later in my collection, but for now, I'm happy with what I've got here. But it's to show you the general range of what most people would try and pick up in their photography and filmmaking. A lot of people would generally sit around the 28, 50, and 85mm range for their kind of general capturing of images. But there we have it. That is the lens perspective test. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it showed you a little bit more in depth how drastic a lens can really change how your picture looks. It's been something that I've been figuring out over the years when I've been making images, like making a decision of like, okay, what lens should I choose for creating what picture? And yeah, that's it from me. Patrick Webb at Heaps Good Productions has brought you this little production, so you can learn a little bit more about the photography techniques, making techniques, and to hopefully help you make a decision of what lens you want to purchase, pick up, use, hire, whatever for your next project. Until then, give us some feedback, and yeah, I look forward to the part 2 of this series. That's one thing that I forgot to mention. Part 2 of this series, I'm going to be using these lenses in a production. I'm doing a self-run production the challenge is to use all of these lenses in a variety of different applications to show how versatile all of these focal lengths can be in different circumstances. But until then, take care and yeah, keep it creating. Keep you, keep everything, keep it creative. All right, guys, thank you very much. See you later.